Hello, and welcome to Journal of the Body podcast. My name is Abby Fernandini, and I am going to be your host. Now, this podcast is all about tuning out what mainstream media has to say and tuning into what your body has to say. A lot of the topics that we'll cover are going to be in the realm of unlearning what you may already know or have been taught when you were younger. So it can be both empowering, but also a little overwhelming. I always encourage you to come in with an open mind and ask questions whenever possible, whether that's to me on Instagram, email, however, text message me, whatever works for you. Today, we're going to be talking about the frequency of fabrics. And this is a topic I've been super excited to cover because it's not something that I think hardly anybody talks about, but it is a fundamental aspect of our life. We eat food, we drink water, we have shelter, and we need clothing. It's kind of one of the few essentials, right? But we never talk about the quality of what we are using and what we are wearing. So, first off, let's start with I'll give you guys a little bit of a breakdown here. Why not? So, we're going to talk about the different types of fabrics. We'll talk about synthetic fabrics versus organic fabrics. And then we'll talk about the frequency of these different fabrics, as well as maybe get into a little bit of about what has been going on in current news. To start, synthetic fabrics are fabrics that are going to be petrochemical derived, and they're typically considered plastic based. So these include nylon, polyester, acrylic, spandex, olefin, suede leather, neoprene, microfiber. Those are all terms that you've likely seen at some point on the label of your clothing. They are, again, petrochemical derived, typically plastic, and they come from coal or oil. It's a kind of a dirty industry. So these are the claimed advantages of synthetic fabrics, right? They say, oh, it dries very quickly. Oh, it's extra absorbent. It's, made to be waterproof. It's made to be elastic, stretchy, swimwear and lingerie. And these are the highlights, right? The synthetic fibers are often increased in like durability, that is fair, and resistance compared to some of the natural fibers. Now, the disadvantages of these synthetic fabrics, I think, greatly outweigh the advantages. And this is typically that at the end of their lifespan, the waste that are produced by these fibers are generally not super great for the environment. So when they're burned, they can produce poisonous gases. They are when they go to the landfill, they take a super long time to, basically break down, and they're not biodegradable at all. And the chemicals that are used in their manufacturing actually leach out into the environment as well. So there's a lot of problem areas there. Now, it's actually really interesting that these synthetic fabrics took such a large leap in terms of popularity because for a couple of reasons. There was a major push for these more synthetic not synthetic fragrances, synthetic fabrics by the animal-based movements that were trying to save the animals and save the planet. In the long run, if you were to look at the risk benefit ratio for that particular cause, I would consider synthetic fabrics to be much more harmful to the environment and to animals and to us than I would animal-based or plant-based organic fabrics. So that's a really interesting part there. The other thing that I would say about these fabrics is that the largest companies in the world are creating their own patented technology, and there's been quite a bit in the news recently. So Shein was one of the big fast fashion brands, right? They've been getting a lot of hate because they basically recently, an independent consumer did a study, or they did some research and digging and found out that Shein workers were actually getting really sick from too high of lead levels in their working environment. So this was actually a pretty big ethical issue. Now, if Shein workers are being exposed to super high levels of lead in their working environment, one can only assume that these levels of lead were also being found and traced back to the fabrics. So it turns out, yes, there is a much higher level of lead in some Shein fabrics than would have flown. I mean, they were flying under the radar. It's kind of crazy. Now, they're not the first people to have, like, they're not the first brand to have this issue. Like, this is a very, very common issue, but it kind of gets shoved under the rug, which I thought was super interesting because Snopes, the classic truth-seeking, what do you call it, fact checker website, said that the evidence was fairly inconclusive, although Canadian, like a lot of the Canadian sites were reporting it, US sites were not. So I thought that was also very interesting because it's this direct like tie to China essentially. I'm not really sure. I'm not going to get into the weeds on that one, but I did think that was interesting, and it was done. An investigation was basically done in Canada. Now, Lululemon, Old Navy, and REI, they've all also had these issues of like finding toxic chemicals in their clothes, which, again, it is all about the level of exposure, but even small amounts of this stuff is just, not really what you're going for, right? That's just not what we want. We're wearing this stuff day in and day out. We're sweating, our pores are wide open. It's a recipe for disaster, right? So that's been in the news recently. Now, organic fibers, of course, are going to be animal or plant derived. So that's leather, that's silk, wool, linen, cotton, hemp, flax, right? All stuff that we're pretty well we pretty well recognize. That stuff is, for me, I feel like now it has become a gold standard after everything that I've slowly started to learn about fabrics and fabric frequencies. So we can get into fabric and fabric frequency. And I think that this is a really great perspective. So like I just said in the beginning of the podcast, is just like the food you eat and the water that you drink, the clothes on your body can be deemed straining on the body or healing on the body. And again, it kind of goes back to this concept that everything has a frequency. And I think that that's a really important line to toe, because it's really easy for us to, just kind of be like, oh, yeah, it's whatever. But what do these frequencies do and how do they impact the body? So we're going to go into that. Now, a study was done in 2003 by a Jewish doctor, Heidi Yellen. And honestly, Heidi's the girl. She's amazing. She did a study on the frequencies of fabric on both synthetic and organic fabrics. So she got, a nice perspective on everything that was going on. Let's put it into perspective. So the human body has a signature frequency of 100 megahertz, okay? A human body that is on its deathbed has a frequency of anywhere from 10 to 15 megahertz. Organic cotton registers at 100 megahertz, okay? The study shows that if the number is lower than 100 megahertz for fabrics, it is considered straining on the body. So again, that cotton is registering right at what the human body would register at. So it's a pretty compatible frequency, as we say. Now, if we go further with some other fabrics, synthetic fabrics, for example, polyester was registering at a frequency of 15 megahertz. Now, for a healthy human body, that is actually considered a straining fabric. To go a little bit further here, non-organic cotton, so going back to the organic fibers, non-organic cotton actually registers at a frequency of about 70. So it's a little bit lower than what the human body registers at. And like I said before, polyester and then also rayon and silk register about 15. Now, what's interesting is that silk is technically considered an organic fiber, but it's registering really, really low on the frequency chart. This is where linen comes into play. This is my favorite part. Linen registers at a frequency of 5,000. Now, because it registers at a frequency of 5,000 or oscillates at a frequency of 5,000, it can be considered a healing fabric. It can actually bring up the human body's frequency. This is especially important for people who are very sick and people who have sensory overload issues, especially from traumatic brain injuries, etc. And I'll tell an interesting story about that in a second. So linen registers at a frequency of 5,000, much, much higher than the human body. Now, wool also oscillates at a frequency of 5,000. Now, this is the part that blew my mind because I was like, it's basic physics, right? When you wear wool and linen together, the frequencies actually cancel out because, and I hope I have this right, wool oscillates from left to right, whereas, yeah, so wool oscillates from left to right, whereas linen oscillates from right to left. And they flow in the opposite directions because wool is meant to like basically warm somebody up. It's like it's a heated frequency, a heated energy. And then linen is more of a cooling. It tends to cool things. So the two cancel each other out and actually equals zero, which I thought was like wild. And that's all to do with the energy field, which we could go down a rabbit hole with that. But so yeah, so now so don't wear a wool sweater with a linen shirt because your frequency will just cancel out and it'll be zero. So going on to a little bit more of what Heidi Yellen did some research. Okay, so she did some research on some other stuff too. They actually did a really cool, pretty interesting like public study. She worked with a guy named Yvonne Fair who basically used this digital instrument and they were doing these public demonstrations with audiences. So they were analyzing the signature frequencies. It started out agriculturally speaking, because if you think about it, like the fabric industry is actually the agricultural industry. You think about wood or you think about cotton, I mean, and some of these, signature fabrics, quote unquote, they come from agriculture. So they started out with like farmers and they were determining the like right time for harvest growth. And that's actually originally how it started, which again, I know that's a total tangent, but I thought that was really interesting. And this is where they basically like ended up finding out some of the different frequencies, and the frequency that they really harnessed and like really honed in on was linen. So the idea, like this idea kind of might be new to you, right? Like it was new to me a little while ago, and I had to do some digging because I was like, wow, this is very, very interesting. And I wasn't really sure what to do with it because I was like, is it true that like fabrics could technically heal? Because there was a lot of stuff that I had like kind of seen and it felt a little woo-woo to me at first. I was like, linen's a healing frequency fabric. Like, what is that? What does that even mean? And then you get into like the energetic field and how things can actually really greatly impact the body. And I'm going to go on a little quick story. So I recently wrote a post on this. I had a follower comment and she goes, I'm a traumatic brain injury survivor. And now the only fabrics that I can wear are cotton and linen. And I was like, whoa, that's really interesting. But that makes a lot of sense because because traumatic brain injury survivors have something called sensory processing disorder sometimes, which means that they're super hypersensitive to one or multiple of the five senses. And it basically means that their brains are on such high alert, even the slightest frequency changes can dramatically affect the way that they're able to cope and they're able to process things. So for example, if they were to wear polyester and they were to go out and they would probably get, like, for example, she would probably get this crazy itching sensation of just like suffocation because of the way that the fabric can basically affect the skin's senses and what that registers back to the brain. So I thought that that was wild. And this is not a surprise because, like I said, the lower frequencies are literally considered straining on the body. But for most of us, we're not able to detect that. Similarly to where we're not always able to detect if a food is causing inflammation or we're not always that tuned in. But for these people, they are so hypersensitive that they're able to actually like pick up on that stuff like that. So fabrics for them are actually a really big deal within the five senses. Okay, so that's a little tangent. Now, something else that this study also covered, which I thought was really interesting, is they covered flax cloth. And flax cloth was found to be like they used it on wounds, essentially. And it was found to increase, no, it says, let's see here. It says, first of all, flax cloth is mentioned in the Torah, in the book of Moses, and it acts as an antenna for energy. So I thought that was also another interesting thing. He said when pure flax cloth was put over a wound or a local pain, it greatly accelerated the healing process. Flaxseed cloth is considered a very sophisticated antenna for his oscilloscope, which is like the moving back and forth of the frequency of the energy field. So flax cloth was considered super healing. Now, a couple other fabrics that aren't necessarily like fully mentioned, but I've seen some really cool regenerative brands come out are going to be hemp cloth is becoming more popular. I've seen a couple of brands. Actually, I was in Miami recently with a really good friend of mine, and we ran into this organic hemp cloth store that had just come up in downtown Miami, it was in Wynwood. And I was like, wow, this is really cool. And their whole concept was like, this is like a really high frequency fabric. And I was like, oh, wow, this may be going mainstream because of the fact that, they're talking about this. And it's also considered this like eco-friendly alternative to what a lot of the synthetic fabrics are seeing. So that was also very interesting. Now, going back to fabrics as a whole and not just necessarily looking at the frequency, the other thing I want to like harp on here is that you remember when like Victoria's Secret became super, super popular and it was like all the rage, right? And all these different like bikini bottoms and especially like thongs and underwear came out. They were using all these different synthetic fragrances, or not synthetic fragrances, although I will say Victoria's Secret was known for their synthetic fragrances as well. But they were using all these different synthetic fibers and synthetic fabrics that essentially didn't like, it was like probably one of the first movements where it's like kind of like ditch the cotton. I feel like in a lot of ways it was this move to ditching the classic cotton underwear and like wear all these different types of underwear. And for the US it was definitely like a huge movement, and it caused some issues for me personally, which was like that area down there is not breathable. When you're wearing those types of underwear, like you down there, like your girly parts are some of the most sensitive parts of the body that we have, right? We have the most amount of nerve endings down there. But not only that, we also have pores that open. Our lining down there is some of the most sensitive in terms of absorption, which you talk about the skin being absorbent, but no, like also our girly parts are very absorbent, ladies. So you got to be aware of what kind of soaps you're using, etc. And that's a tangent. But when you don't allow that area to breathe, the body creates bacteria and it tries to expel it. And bacteria is amazing in a lot of ways because it's such a protective mechanism. I think, and this is again going on a tangent, but I think about the IUD and I think about my IUD, for example. When there is a foreign object on or in the body, like of IUD, for example, the body creates this protective mechanism to try to push whatever said object is away from the body. So the IUD, for example, my body was trying to expel the IUD. It was creating a ton of bacteria to try to get rid of that particular foreign object. And a lot can be said for when you don't let a particular area to breathe, and you've almost got this layer of literal plastic, if it is synthetic petrochemical derived fibers, the body is creating a wall of bacteria down there to literally protect what is being absorbed, protect. So a lot of girls are going to get UTIs, they'll have BV, all of those different imbalances, even in the pH of your vagina. It's going to be happening if you're not allowing it to breathe. And I've been getting on like this topic with my friends a lot because I've had a few gal friends that have recently had UTIs, and we've talked a lot about how absorbent those parts down there are. And even in like, for example, a change in spring, if you're like walking outside a ton and there's a lot of changes in, for example, if you live in a neighborhood even, and you're going outside and there's been a ton of pesticides recently like used in your neighborhood even are like we are so absorbent down there that you could be walking in spring and you could actually get a UTI from something like that. And you would never be able to deduct the fact that that was the cause, but that's how sensitive we are. So, using breathable material down there is so, so important because your sweat and your bacteria are detoxification and protective methods. And we really need to be wearing 100% cotton down there. So ditch the underwear that is synthetic. Okay. You can be wearing them linen, linen pants, linen shorts, whatever. And even like, for example, I've started for my workouts, I've started wearing cotton sweatpants a little bit more. Or it's really hard to say, oh, I'm going to give up all synthetic fabrics because that's not realistic. You still got a full wardrobe of synthetic fabrics. You still have all these things. Well, how do we protect our most important parts? If you're planning on wearing something like biker shorts or yoga pants, all you got to do, go buy a pack of 5 organic cotton thongs, and you can wear cotton thongs with your synthetic fabrics as just a nice little protective cushion. And that's what I've started doing because here's the deal. I'll talk about fabrics all day long, but at the end of the day, a vast majority of my wardrobe is synthetic fabric. Now I'm making the switch slowly as I can and doing it in the right way that allows me to take my time with it and I'm not like obsessing over it, but making the switch slowly and or using those little protective cushions can really make a world of a difference for your vaginal health. And also the same thing can be said for your armpits. So going off of what I've mentioned here, I know this is a tangent away from frequencies, but also in respect to your armpits. Like, have you ever noticed if you wear a particular type of clothing and like Lululemon for me was like that clothing? Okay, so I worked for Lululemon and God bless them. I was obsessed with the company, right? But the fact of the matter is they have this complete synthetic fabric thing on lock. They've got the Luon and the Luxtreme and the New Lux and the New Lu and the Everlux and the Silverescent. And like, thank God they have a little cotton in there. But they have all these patented like synthetic fabric technologies. And I would notice that if I would wear certain pieces, I would wear a shirt or maybe a pair of my odor would literally change based on if I was wearing a particular type of fiber. Now, not everybody's always that in tune with their bodies, and you can always chalk it up to a million different things. You have viral overload, etc. But I noticed for myself that like if I wore certain types of fabrics, I would sweat more, and I would like have these particular like scents that I was like, oh, that's a little different from my like what I'm used to or it's normal. And my theory is that's actually just the body creating a layer of bacteria or expelling out of our most sensitive areas, like the armpits. And that's just a protective mechanism. So like going off of like the theory of detoxification, right? Like your sweat glands in your armpits are some of the most important detoxification glands that you can protect. And that's not just with fabrics, that's also with deodorants, etc. And so, thinking about all of that and noticing those little changes can make a world of a difference for the way that you're kind of reading and picking up things for your body. Now, you don't have to go and like throw everything out. I think that's a little dramatic. I think none of us here are going to do that. Even myself, like I make this switch now, and I definitely am really conscientious of reading the labels on the clothes that I am now purchasing. And I do make way more of an effort to not buy synthetic fabrics like I was. But like it'll take time, right? So here's my tips for if you're going to start switching out some of your fabrics. Now, first of all, take inventory because you'd actually be surprised. Like coming across cotton is not as hard as you think. Like a lot of the stuff in my closet, like even like my stuff from Target, etc., like it was like 100% cotton. And I was like pleasantly surprised because I was like, oh, that's great. Like this is considered a high quality fabric for myself. Like I love that. And then there was like certain fabrics that actually just like genuinely bothered me. And I could never pinpoint what the reason was until I realized that it was because they were 100% polyester. Shout out to the tank top that I threw out the other day because I was like, I can't do it anymore. I literally cannot wear this thing. It drives me crazy. It's like itchy, uncomfortable. But yeah, so take inventory of what you have currently. You might be pleasantly surprised. The labels are typically down on the lower part of your shirts and then also on your pants. Sometimes they're like right on the back of your jeans, like where the waistband is. It just depends. But that is like the wash label. And it also has all of the different fabrics essentially that are used. So if it's like a cotton polyester blend, for example, it'll say like, 30% polyester, 70% cotton. So take inventory, see what you got. Now, this has been my savings hack for how to get high quality clothes, and that is thrifting. Thrifting is such a great way, and I did this actually in Spain and in Europe because a lot of the fabrics that they mostly wear there is linen and cotton. It's still kind of like the standard for them, and there's tons of linen shops everywhere. But I did some thrifting. I've done it here in the States and also in Europe. But you can find amazing, shirts and clothes and pants and whatever thrifting. You just have to read the labels. It's like food, it's like grocery shopping, but it's like for your clothes. You just got to read the labels, you got to see what you're working with, and then you say, oh, this is like a pretty high quality fiber, and it feels good, looks good, great, like let's do it. So that is one of my hacks. Also, like if you go to Europe, you can just stock up on your linen. Yeah, that's what you do. You just go stock up. You save up for a summer, and then you go to Spain or Italy or wherever, and you come back with 5 new jumpsuits, a couple tops, and there you have it. That's like, that's the slightly less efficient way to do things. It's like slightly more complicated. But yeah, I mean, there's that. And then also like just in general, I think that a lot of times now, linen definitely gets overmarked in terms of pricing. So finding those off the cusp dealers like secondhand clothing shops, like I mentioned before, and also like farmers markets. For example, our farmers market up in here, like in New York, we have 2 linen booths that are pretty reasonably priced in terms of what you get. Like you can get a full dress that's like really, really high quality with buttons and everything. It's like pretty tailored for like $50. And I think that it's just picking out those little smaller boutique, or, off the cusp spots that are going to have those types of fabrics. And then, of course, cotton's everywhere. So you can find cotton anywhere, literally. You walk into any store and they've got to have 100% cotton something somewhere. But definitely ditch the fast fashion, the Sheen, the Zoffel, the Hello Polly, the Hello Molly. I don't even know. I don't know. There's so many brands. But you're going to wear that outfit a couple times. You're going to get bored of it. And then that thing takes a half century to break down because it's not biodegradable at all. So that's the tea, gals. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Let me know if you have any questions. Send me an Instagram DM or comment or whatever. Do the girly things at Abby Fernandini. I'll drop it in the show notes. Thanks for listening if you got this far. Appreciate the support. And yeah, let's talk about some topics that we can go over. I love a good ramble. Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen. Also, I'm not going to discredit. There's probably gentlemen listening too. Maybe. Who knows? All right. Bye, guys.